Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something wild. We are going to conduct a high-stakes forensic autopsy, but of a crime scene that took place 270 kilometers above our heads. We're going to completely unpack the exact events that literally changed how nations operate in orbit forever. It's this absolutely fascinating intersection of orbital mechanics, cutting-edge engineering, and believe it or not, psychological warfare. And this is all entirely based on our source material detailing a very tense encounter between a massive American intelligence asset and a Russian inspector satellite. But to really get the gravity of this situation, you have to completely shift your perspective on distance. I mean, here on Earth, 50 kilometers, that seems like a pretty safe buffer, right? Well, in low Earth orbit, when you're traveling at, say, 7.8 kilometers per second, 50 kilometers isn't a safe buffer at all. It is knife-sighting range. It's the exact moment where the brutal rules of physics just strip away your ability to react. The stakes here are absolutely terrifying. And you know what's really incredible? How the world actually found out about this terrifying proximity in the first place. So picture this. It's January 30, 2020. A graduate student in astrodynamics over at Purdue University, a guy named Michael Thompson, is up late at night analyzing public tracking data. He sends out a quick 47-word tweet. And without even realizing it, his open-source analysis forced 3 highly classified U.S. intelligence agencies, we're talking the National Reconnaissance Office, U.S. Space Command, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, to publicly admit that their prized $5 billion asset was actively being hunted. Crazy, right? Just 11 days after that tweet dropped, General John W. J. Raymond, the very first chief of space operations for the U.S. Space Force, came out with a genuinely chilling statement. He openly conceded that an inspection of a satellite by an enemy craft is, and I quote, not materially different from an approach to attack. The source text points out that with just this one single sentence, General Raymond completely shattered the 60-year-old myth that space was this peaceful sanctuary. It was actually the first time an American military commander publicly admitted that an inspection in orbit is fundamentally indistinguishable from an attack run. So let's consider the actual players in this orbital drama, because the sheer contrast between the target and the hunter is staggering. On one side, you've got USA-245. This thing is a massive, school bus-sized optical reconnaissance platform. It's packing a mirror identical in size to the Hubble Space Telescope, but it has this one absolutely critical structural vulnerability. It was built to look down at the Earth, not sideways at a tiny predator. It literally cannot see itself being observed. And the Russian satellite, Kosmos 2542, it perfectly exploited that exact blind spot. Now, if we dig into the engineering DNA of that hunter, the red flags are just glaring. Kosmos 2542 was officially billed as a harmless inspector of domestic spacecraft. Right, but it was actually built by a chemical weapons institute. Plus, it was equipped with a radar-absorbing stealth coating made of ferromagnetic nanoparticles. That is a highly specialized technology that simply does not exist in civilian spaceflight. Oh, and its command architecture? That came from the exact same corporation that builds surface-to-air missiles. So yeah, this wasn't some friendly civilian inspector. The source data clearly points to a disguised weapons system. The resulting chase lasted exactly 154 days, and it was a brutal display of asymmetry. Right after Kosmos 2542 launched, it pulled off this crazy nesting doll maneuver, basically splitting in two to release an even smaller sub-satellite called Kosmos 2543. When the American satellite, USA-245, tried to evade this thing, it had to burn its precious, irreplaceable hydrazine propellant. It was literally burning through its own operational lifespan just to run away. Meanwhile, the tiny Russian satellite could just easily choreograph coplanar shadowing and match every single move simply because it was metabolically far cheaper to fly. So the really crucial question here is how they maintained this stalk so efficiently for so long. Well, it all comes down to the Hill-Clohessy Wiltshire equations. Now, I know that's some incredibly dense orbital mechanics, but think about it this way. Because of the way gravity and tidal forces work in low Earth orbit, a tiny little impulse of thrust can actually lock a chaser satellite into a continuous looping orbit around its target. It creates what is essentially a gravitational shoebox. The hunter doesn't even need to constantly burn fuel to follow its prey. Physics just mathematically traps the target right inside that geometric box. And here's the scariest part. Once you are trapped in that shoebox at a distance of 50 kilometers, your fate is sealed by one terrifying number, 250 seconds. Imagine having exactly 4 minutes and 10 seconds to react to an incoming threat. In that incredibly short window, if the hunter satellite releases a kinetic kill vehicle at a closing speed of 200 meters per second, it takes exactly 250 seconds to impact. The massive American satellite could possibly, move about 125 meters in that time. That is nowhere near enough to escape a kinetic kill radius. Mathematically speaking, evasion is completely foreclosed. But listen, the threat wasn't just kinetic. It was also electromagnetic. Because of the inverse square law of signal strength, hovering just 300 kilometers away put Kosmos 2542 right in the side lobe leakage zone. To put a number on that, its signal reception was an astonishing 278 times stronger than a ground station 5,000 kilometers away. I mean, that is an absolute intelligence bonanza. To really put that into perspective, this was the electromagnetic equivalent of moving from a noisy parking lot outside a stadium right into a VIP front row seat. Russia didn't even need to decrypt a single piece of actual data. Just by sitting there and monitoring the antenna patterns, the metadata, and the high bandwidth downlink bursts from that front row seat, they could figure out exactly what targets the American satellite was photographing back down on Earth. And then the theoretical became undeniably real. On July 15, 2020, Russia actually tested this exact kill chain. Remember that parent satellite that released the child inspector? Well, on this day, that child inspector fired a grandchild, a high-speed projectile known as Object 45915, directly at a Russian target dummy satellite. They ran a complete, closed-loop orbital assassination simulation using entirely their own hardware, just to validate this new warfighting doctrine. But as our source text brilliantly reveals, the hardware is actually only half the story here. The other half? That's a Soviet-era psychological doctrine called reflexive control. The entire goal is to manipulate your adversary into making the exact choices you want them to make. It's fascinating. By creating an ambiguous signal, forcing the U.S. to publicly admit its vulnerability, dragging them into a diplomatic space with zero enforcement mechanisms, and then finally demonstrating the weapon, this operation perfectly shaped the American response. It was an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. And you have to understand, this was not an isolated incident. This single experimental operation very rapidly metastasized into a serial production line. We're talking from the first nesting doll sequence in 2017 to the 2019 stalk we were just discussing, all the way to publicly documented swarm rendezvous tests and the shadowing of next-generation satellites in 2024 and 2025. The doctrine of the orbital stalker didn't just fade away. It became a permanent, mass-produced reality. And the sheer scale of this new reality is just staggering. This nesting doll satellite, it's really just one tiny node in a massive, fully integrated counterspace architecture. There's Kalina, which is a ground-based laser dome in the Caucasus Mountains meant to blind optical sensors. There's Sokol-Echelon, an airborne laser system. There's the mobile Peresvet dazzler rolling around with ICBMs. And there are these geostationary stalkers, like Olymp-K, just eavesdropping on global communications. This strategy targets literally every single layer of the orbital domain that humanity relies upon. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from our source material today. Yes, the American spy satellite physically survived its 154-day stalk. But the fundamental assumption that orbit is just this empty, peaceful observation deck, that is over forever. The 60-year space inquiry doctrine is entirely dead, as military readiness reports now clearly confirm space has fundamentally, irreversibly transitioned into contested terrain. The new operating manual for orbit has been written, and it contains a truly chilling reality. You are being watched, and you have to assume that whatever is watching you is fully capable of destroying you. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought, derived straight from the source material. In this entirely new era of orbital warfare, if everything watching you is preparing to kill you, how do you survive? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.